Heat is the deadliest weather event in the United States. Not hurricanes, not tornadoes, not flooding. Heat. And the population it kills most efficiently is adults over 65, who account for nearly 80% of all heat-related deaths in this country, despite representing a fraction of the total population. What makes that statistic catastrophic, rather than merely tragic, is that the overwhelming majority of those deaths are preceded by 5 specific, identifiable, correctable mistakes that most seniors and most of their families have no idea they are making. Not dramatic errors. Quiet, habitual, entirely understandable mistakes that most people would never recognize as dangerous until they are no longer in a position to correct them. Today, I am walking you through all 5, the precise biological reason each one is far more dangerous after 65 than it would ever have been at 40, and exactly what to do instead, starting today. I'm Dr. William. Decades in internal medicine with a concentrated focus on heat-related illness in older adults, a topic that receives almost no clinical attention between July and September, and then fills emergency departments during the exact window when it should have been prevented. I started this channel because heat illness in adults over 65 is almost entirely preventable with the right information, and that information almost never arrives before it is needed. Before I get into it, drop a comment with your age and where you live, just your state or country. I read every single comment. Heat risk varies significantly by geography, by housing type, and by what your local temperatures have looked like this week, and knowing where you are helps me understand what the people watching this are actually navigating right now. Now, here is the foundation, because without understanding what heat does to the aging body at the physiological level, the 5 mistakes I'm about to describe will feel like obvious caution rather than the precise biological vulnerabilities they actually represent. Think of your body's heat regulation system like a sophisticated building HVAC system, a network of sensors, pumps, vents, and radiators that maintains interior temperature within a narrow operating range, regardless of what the exterior environment is doing. In a younger adult, this system has enormous capacity and rapid response time. 2 mechanisms drive most of it. The first is sweating. Evaporative cooling that can dissipate extraordinary amounts of heat when functioning properly. The second is cutaneous vasodilation, the widening of blood vessels directly beneath the skin that brings hot blood from the body's core to the surface, where it can radiate heat into the surrounding air. Both mechanisms require speed, volume, and coordination to work effectively. After 65, both degrade in ways that are predictable, measurable, and largely invisible to the person experiencing them. Sweat gland density decreases. The sweat response to rising core temperature activates later and produces less volume per degree of temperature rise. Cutaneous vasodilation is slower and less complete, meaning hot blood stays in the core longer before being routed to the surface. The cardiovascular system, already operating with reduced reserve, must work harder to maintain blood pressure while simultaneously shunting blood toward the skin for cooling. And the thirst mechanism, which in a healthy young adult fires well before dehydration becomes clinically significant, is genuinely blunted in older adults. You can be significantly dehydrated, in genuine early danger, and feel no meaningful thirst at all. Here is the part that belongs in every appointment between May and September and almost never arrives there. Several of the most commonly prescribed medications in adults over 65 directly impair one or more of these heat regulation mechanisms, and most patients taking them have no idea their medication has changed their heat tolerance in a way that makes a hot afternoon categorically more dangerous than it would be for someone their age without those drugs. The pharmaceutical system manages the downstream consequences of heat illness. It has no comparable commercial interest in communicating this risk upstream to the patients most exposed to it. We do. Here is what they need to know. Number one is waiting until you feel thirsty to drink water during a heat wave, and this mistake kills people who have no idea they are in danger because they feel completely fine right up until they are not. This is the most deceptive mistake on this entire list because it sounds like sensible, responsible self-monitoring. If you are thirsty, you drink. If you are not thirsty, you are okay. In a 35-year-old, that logic is approximately correct. In a 70-year-old, it is physiologically false and clinically dangerous. Here is the mechanism. Your thirst signal is generated by specialized neurons in the hypothalamus called osmoreceptors, cells that detect the concentration of sodium and other solutes in your blood and trigger the conscious sensation of thirst when that concentration rises above a threshold. In healthy young adults, this system fires early and accurately. The thirst sensation arrives before meaningful dehydration has occurred, giving the person adequate time to respond. After 65, the sensitivity of these osmoreceptors declines measurably. The threshold shifts upward. You can lose enough fluid through sweating and respiration to produce genuine cardiovascular and neurological stress without ever generating a thirst signal strong enough to prompt drinking. Think of it like a smoke alarm whose battery has been quietly weakening for years. The room is filling with smoke before the alarm finally sounds, and by that point, the situation has already progressed well past the early intervention window. Research from the Journal of Applied Physiology found that older adults exposed to identical heat stress conditions as younger adults showed significantly delayed and blunted thirst responses with measurably higher plasma osmolality, a direct marker of dehydration severity. At the moment thirst was first reported, they were more dehydrated before they felt thirsty than the younger comparison group was at their worst point. I had a patient, Walter, 77, from Phoenix, Arizona, a retired school teacher who called his daughter from his kitchen floor on a July afternoon. He had been home without adequate cooling, feeling what he described as slightly tired but not thirsty, drinking only 1 glass of water across 8 hours. By the time emergency services arrived, his core temperature was over 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and his sodium level indicated severe dehydration. He recovered fully, which is not always the outcome. When I spoke with him afterward, he told me, "I kept waiting until I felt thirsty. I never really did." That statement, "I never really did," is the biological reality of the aging osmoreceptor system during a heat wave. The action step is not complicated, but requires deliberate implementation precisely because the normal body signal that would remind you has been weakened. Set a timer on your phone for every 30 minutes during any heat wave day. At each alarm, drink 4 to 6 ounces of water, whether you feel any thirst or not. Across an 8-hour period in the heat, that schedule delivers the minimum volume required to replace sweat losses before they accumulate into clinical dehydration. Number 2 is relying on a fan as your primary cooling strategy during extreme heat. And this mistake is rooted in a genuine misunderstanding of the physics of how a fan actually works, a misunderstanding most people carry entirely reasonably because fans have been a reliable comfort tool their entire lives. Here is the mechanism, and it requires understanding the difference between the two ways your body loses heat to the environment. The first is convection. Moving air carries heat away from the skin surface through direct contact. A fan drives convection, When the air temperature is below your skin surface temperature, roughly below 95 degrees Fahrenheit, a fan moving that cooler air across your skin does produce genuine cooling. This is the condition under which fans have worked your entire life. The second mechanism is evaporation. Sweat on the skin surface evaporates, and the phase change from liquid to vapor carries heat away with extraordinary efficiency. A fan also increases the evaporation rate of sweat. This is effective cooling under one critical condition. The air must be dry enough to accept the evaporating moisture. When the temperature rises above 95 degrees combined with significant humidity, both mechanisms fail simultaneously. The convective air moving across your skin is now warmer than your skin. The fan is delivering hot air rather than removing heat, and the humidity is high enough that evaporation slows dramatically. Sweat sits on the skin because the surrounding air is already saturated and cannot accept more moisture. At that point, a fan is generating zero meaningful cooling. It is moving hot, humid air across a person whose sweat cannot evaporate, whose body is receiving radiant heat from the hot air contact, and who may not realize the danger because the moving air still creates a sensation of relief. The World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control both explicitly state that electric fans do not prevent heat-related illness when temperatures exceed 95 degrees Fahrenheit in high humidity and may accelerate dangerous fluid loss through increased respiratory and skin surface evaporation without producing any compensatory cooling benefit. During the 2003 European heat wave, the event that killed approximately 70,000 people across Europe, the overwhelming majority of them elderly, the most common physical environment found among deceased individuals was an apartment with a fan running. The fan had not protected them. I had a patient, Dorothy, 74, from Houston, Texas, a retired nurse who had lived in her home for 31 years and relied on ceiling fans every summer without issue. During a heat wave with outdoor temperatures of 101 degrees and overnight lows staying above 85, she kept her fan running all night with windows open, believing she was cooling the house. Her bedroom reached 97 degrees by 3 in the morning. She woke confused and unable to stand without holding the wall. Her core temperature was 103.2 by the time her son reached her. She told me from her hospital bed, "That fan has always worked. I didn't realize the weather had become something different from anything I had lived through before." The action step: identify the coolest location available to you before a heat wave arrives. Air-conditioned environments, your own home with functioning air conditioning, a neighbor's home, a library, a senior center, a shopping mall, become life safety infrastructure during extreme heat events, not comfort preferences. During any day where temperature and humidity combine to produce a heat index above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, a fan is insufficient as your primary cooling strategy. Plan to spend the peak heat hours in a genuinely air-conditioned space. Number 3 is taking your regular medications during a heat wave without knowing which ones change your heat tolerance. And I consider this the most urgently important mistake to communicate, because it operates entirely invisibly, without any symptom that would alert you, and it applies to the exact medication classes most commonly prescribed to adults over 65. Let me be absolutely clear before going any further. Nothing here means stop any medication. I am asking you to be informed about what your medication is doing to your physiology during heat exposure so you can compensate appropriately and have the right conversation with your doctor. Here is the mechanism across the most common drug categories. Diuretics, hydrochlorothiazide, furosemide, spironolactone, are prescribed to millions of older adults for blood pressure and heart failure management. They work by promoting urinary fluid and sodium loss. During heat exposure, when your body is already losing fluid through sweating, a diuretic is simultaneously pulling additional fluid through the kidneys. The combined loss can exceed your body's compensatory capacity within hours during extreme heat, producing dangerously low blood volume and electrolyte imbalances. Beta blockers, metoprolol, atenolol, carvedilol reduce heart rate as their primary mechanism. During heat exposure, your cardiovascular system responds to the demand for cutaneous blood flow by increasing cardiac output, pumping faster and harder to route more blood to the skin surface for cooling. A beta blocker prevents that compensatory increase. Think of it like a speed limiter on an engine that needs to run at high RPM to complete a critical task. The limiter does not care about the task, only the number. Anticholinergic medications, including certain bladder medications, some antihistamines, specific antidepressants, and some antipsychotics, directly block the nerve signals that activate sweat glands. Sweating is one of your two primary cooling mechanisms. Blocking it during a heat wave removes the most powerful tool your body has for managing core temperature. Research from the British Medical Journal identified anticholinergic medication use as one of the single strongest predictors of heat-related death in older adults during heatwave events. Stronger than age alone, stronger than most chronic conditions. I had a patient, Sylvia, 70, from Atlanta, Georgia, a retired accountant who took both a diuretic for blood pressure and a bladder medication with anticholinergic properties she had been on for 4 years. During a heat wave, she developed severe heat exhaustion within 2 hours of moderate outdoor activity in the morning hours. Hours that would not typically be considered the highest risk window. Her sweat production had been pharmacologically blocked. Her fluid reserve was being actively depleted by her diuretic simultaneously. She had no awareness that her combination of medications had made her heat tolerance categorically different from someone her age without those drugs. The action step: pull out your full medication list and call your pharmacist or physician with one specific question. Do any of these medications change my heat tolerance? And what should I do differently during extreme heat? That single conversation can produce specific, personalized guidance. Perhaps a temporary diuretic dose adjustment, identification of which medication is blocking sweating, or a specific hydration target to compensate. It is a 5-minute call that can be a life-saving one. Let me pause here. If this video is giving you a framework for something your physician has never specifically discussed with you going into summer, and for most people watching this, it has not, hit that subscribe button and share this video right now with someone you care about over 65. This channel exists because people like you pass this information to the person who most needs it. We have 2 mistakes left, and both carry consequences as serious as everything we have already covered. Number 4 is doing outdoor activity or physical work during peak heat hours. And the reason this mistake is specifically dangerous for adults over 65 is not simply the obvious one. Not just that it is hot outside, but because of the compounded cardiovascular demand that heat and physical exertion create simultaneously in a body with reduced reserve. During any physical activity in hot conditions, your body faces 2 simultaneous cardiovascular demands that are each significant independently and extreme when combined. The working muscles need increased blood flow to deliver oxygen and remove metabolic waste. The skin surface simultaneously needs increased blood flow to carry core heat to the surface for dissipation. Both are drawing from the same cardiac output. Think of it like 2 major departments simultaneously demanding maximum resources from a budget that has less margin than it once did. Individually, each request is manageable. Together, they may overdraw the account. In a 40-year-old with full cardiovascular reserve, the heart can increase output enough to serve both demands without approaching its limits. In a 70-year-old with naturally reduced reserve, and particularly in anyone with hypertension, coronary artery disease, or heart failure, These simultaneous demands can push the heart toward its functional ceiling during what appears from the outside to be entirely modest activity. Gardening, walking to the mailbox, carrying groceries from the car. Activities that appear unremarkable become cardiovascular emergencies in extreme heat because the relative cardiovascular load, the percentage of maximum cardiac capacity being utilized, is dramatically higher for an older body at the same absolute activity level. Research from the American Heart Association found that the incidence of cardiac events during physical exertion in heat rises disproportionately in adults over 65 compared to younger adults performing equivalent activity under identical conditions. I had a patient, Raymond, 76, from Dallas, Texas, a retired landscaper who prided himself on maintaining his own yard. On a morning in early August, with a heat index of 98 degrees by 9 o'clock, he spent 40 minutes on yard work. His wife found him seated on the back step, unable to walk, pale and confused, with his speech slightly slurred. His core temperature was 105.1 degrees. He spent 4 days in intensive care. He had told me at his previous appointment that he always worked in the morning to avoid the afternoon heat. He did not know that by late July in his city, 9 in the morning was already within the peak heat window given the overnight heat retained in the ground and structures. The action step during any heat wave: define peak outdoor hours by the heat index for your specific location, rather than simply by clock time. In many climates during summer, the dangerous window extends from 9 or 10 in the morning until 7 in the evening. Check your local heat index every morning before any outdoor plans. Any necessary outdoor tasks should be completed before 8 in the morning, done in maximum intervals of 15 minutes, with full rest breaks in shade between each interval, with cold water immediately accessible and never alone. Another person who can recognize early heat illness is a safety measure, not a social preference. Number 5 is failing to recognize the early warning signs of heat exhaustion before they cross into heat stroke. And this is the mistake with the most immediately life-threatening consequences, because the window between the two conditions can close in less than 30 minutes, and heat stroke in older adults carries a mortality rate that makes it a true medical emergency with no room for a wait-and-see response. Here is the progression you need to understand clearly. Heat exhaustion is your body's signal that its cooling system is being overwhelmed, core temperature is rising, compensatory mechanisms are failing, but the brain and organs are not yet in direct danger. Heat stroke is what occurs when core temperature exceeds 103 to 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and the brain, kidneys, liver, and cardiac muscle begin suffering direct thermal damage. The critical difference is this: heat exhaustion is always reversible with prompt cooling. Heat stroke carries an estimated mortality rate in adults over 65 of 40 to 60%, even with hospital treatment. The recognition problem specific to older adults is that the classic warning signs of heat exhaustion in younger people, heavy sweating, intense thirst, pale, clammy skin, are blunted or entirely absent in older adults for exactly the mechanisms established at the beginning of this video. Sweating is reduced. Thirst is blunted. The first signals an older adult actually notices are subtle and easily misattributed to familiar, non-threatening causes. Mild confusion that feels like fatigue, slight unsteadiness that seems like a dizzy spell, nausea that resembles an upset stomach, unusual fatigue that suggests the need for a rest. These are the signals most people sit down and wait through rather than act on immediately. Research from the Centers for Disease Control found that the majority of heat-related deaths in adults over 65 involve individuals who recognized they felt unwell but delayed seeking cooling or medical assistance for 30 to 60 minutes beyond the point where prompt intervention would have prevented deterioration into heat stroke. The delay is not carelessness. It is the absence of specific knowledge about what those early signals mean and how rapidly the timeline can close. I had a patient, Harriet, 82, from Memphis, Tennessee, a retired school teacher who was found by her neighbor on a hot afternoon, sitting in her living room chair, confused, barely responsive, with skin hot to the touch, and critically, with no sweat on her skin whatsoever. Her neighbor recognized hot, dry skin combined with confusion as an emergency rather than a person who simply needed water and a cool cloth. Emergency services were called immediately, while the neighbor applied cold, wet towels to Harriet's neck, armpits, and groin. Harriet's core temperature was 106.1 degrees. She survived because her neighbor had learned that confusion plus hot, dry skin in a heat wave was not a person who needed to rest. It was a person who needed paramedics. Harriet told me 6 months later, "My neighbor saved my life. I had no idea what was happening to me." The action step: memorize 3 warning signs that require immediate cooling and consideration of emergency services, regardless of how mild they appear at first. Sudden confusion or any change in mental status, hot skin that is dry rather than sweaty in a hot environment, and core temperature at or above 103 degrees. Any combination of these signs in yourself or someone you are checking on is a call to emergency services, while simultaneously beginning external cooling with cold, wet towels applied to the neck, armpits, and groin, the areas where large blood vessels run closest to the skin surface and where cooling reaches the circulation most rapidly. So here is how all 5 mistakes connect back to the same physiological picture established at the start. Your heat regulation system after 65 is operating with reduced sensor sensitivity, reduced evaporative capacity, reduced cardiovascular reserve, and often with pharmacological modifications from your medication list that further impair specific critical components simultaneously. The thirst sensor is quiet when it should be screaming. The fan you have trusted for decades fails at the exact temperatures that now matter most. The medications keeping you healthy are simultaneously narrowing your heat tolerance window without any notification to you or frequently to your physician. The cardiovascular system that needs to route blood to both working muscles and the skin surface is operating with less reserve than it had at every prior summer of your life, and the warning signs that would clearly signal danger in a younger body arrive muted, delayed, and easily misattributed to familiar, non-threatening causes. Walter on his kitchen floor felt only tired, not thirsty. Dorothy's fan was running while her bedroom reached 97 degrees. Sylvia's sweating mechanism had been pharmacologically disabled before she ever stepped outside. Raymond was working at 9 in the morning and was in intensive care by noon. Harriet sat in her favorite chair while her brain was being thermally injured with every passing minute. The mistake in every case was not carelessness. It was the absence of specific mechanistic information about how aging had changed the rules. These were not people taking unnecessary risks. They were people operating on reasonable assumptions that had quietly stopped being true. Here is your plan starting today. First, identify the coolest location available to you right now before the next heat wave arrives, and know specifically how you will access it during peak hours. Air conditioning during extreme heat is life safety infrastructure, not a luxury. Second, set a hydration alarm for every 30 minutes on any hot day and drink 4 to 6 ounces at each alarm without waiting for thirst. Start this tonight by filling a water bottle and placing it where you will see it first thing tomorrow morning. Third, pull out your complete medication list and call your pharmacist or physician with this specific question. Do any of these medications change my heat tolerance, and what should I do differently during a heat wave? Fourth, check the heat index for your location every morning during any summer heat event and complete all outdoor activity before 8 in the morning in 15-minute intervals maximum, never alone, with cold water immediately at hand. Fifth, Write down the 3 heat stroke warning signs: sudden confusion, hot, dry skin without sweating, and temperature at or above 103 degrees on a piece of paper posted somewhere visible in your home, and share that list with whoever checks on you most regularly. If any person you are with shows that combination of signs, call emergency services immediately while beginning cold towel cooling to the neck, armpits, and groin. Sixth, during any day with a heat index above 90 degrees, personally check on any neighbor or family member over 65 who lives alone at least twice. A 30-second check-in, a knock on the door, a phone call, a brief visit, is the practical difference between an intervention and a tragedy for a population whose internal warning signals arrive too quietly to save themselves alone. Now, there is something directly connected to everything covered today that most people living through a multi-day heat wave are doing without any awareness that it is compounding every single one of these 5 risks simultaneously. A specific nighttime habit that prevents the overnight core temperature drop, your body needs to begin the following heat wave day with adequate physiological reserve. The first hot day is manageable. The second is harder. By the 3rd consecutive hot night without overnight recovery, the same biology we covered today is operating from a significantly compromised starting point, and the threshold for heat exhaustion drops with each accumulated night. Most people who survive day 1 without incident are not prepared for what the 3rd consecutive hot night does to this exact system. That is exactly what I'm covering in the next video, and it will be on your screen right now. I'm Dr. William. Dr.